on a street corner in town and started preaching, walking up and down the sidewalk in front of a hardware and sporting goods store, back and forth in front of the shotguns and spinning casting rods, Coleman camp stoves in the window, and looking across the street to the green stamped Redemption store, where all the women bought their trading stands. Cars and trucks were passing on the street. Women were going in and out of the Redemption store. And a few men and boys were standing around in groups of 3 or 4. The Brier knew they were listening, even though they were not looking at it. He took as his text, "You must be born again," and started drawing the people closer, saying, "You may say, preacher, where is your black Bible? Why ain't you preaching down sin? You may say, preacher, why ain't you talking about hell? What about lipstick and short dresses? What about cigarettes and whiskey? What about dope and long hair?" Well, I didn't bring my Bible for a purpose, because this morning I wanted to say to you, I've been through all the books and come out yon side. I'm educated, but not like the brown boys. Let me tell you about the brown boys. Fellow over close to where I live wanted some little cedar trees dug up and planted in a row beside his house. Tried to hire the Johnson boys, his neighbors. They were too scared to do it. Didn't believe in digging up cedar trees. They'd always heard you die whenever the trees got tall enough for their shadow to cover your grave. Get somebody else, they said. Get old Jim Brown and Tom Brown. They're educated, don't believe in nothing. Well, I'm educated, but not like the brown boys. There's something I believe in. You must be born again. When he told about the brown boys, the Brier heard some of the men laugh and say things to one another. Across the street at the Redemption store, a woman had come out and stopped, holding a little boy by the hand. The Brier figured the woman and the little boy would like the story too. You hear preachers talk about being lost. What does it mean? What's it got to do with being born again? Feller I know, he didn't go to church, but a church bus always ran right by his house. And his boy, about 5 or 6 years old, wanted to ride it, so he let him go. Little boy got over there in church, and they were having a revival. Preacher knelt down by the little boy, said, "Son, are you lost?" Little boy said, "Yes," for the bus had gone up several creeks and hollers, picking up other people, and carried the little boy so far from home he didn't know where he was. We're not so different from that little boy. We can be lost sitting right in the church house, because we've been carried a long way around. We've got so far away from home we don't know where we are, how we got where we are, how to get home again. I know I wasn't so different from that little boy. In my Father's house, Jesus said. Our foreparents left us a home here in the mountains, but we try to live in somebody else's home. We're ashamed to live in our Father's house. We think it's too old-fashioned. Our foreparents left us a very fine inheritance, but we don't believe it. I just want to set you down, gather you together, and read you the will. You wanted to run off and leave it, this inheritance. You didn't want to see it, ashamed to hear about it, thought it wasn't pretty because it wasn't factory made. You put it back in the attic. You've thrown it off in the corner of the barn, thrown it down into a ditch. In my Father's house, the house our foreparents left, had a song, had a story. We didn't care. We said them old love songs, them old ballads, them old stories and light foolishness. We were too busy anyway, giving our timber away, giving our coal away, to worry about love songs, to worry about balance, to worry about old stories and light foolishness. But I know a man, he had a song from his foreparents. It got carried off to New York City. And when he heard it played on TV one night by three fellers who clowned and hip swinged, he said he began to feel sick, like he'd lost a loved one. Tears came in his eyes, and he went out on the ridge and bawled and said, Lord, couldn't they leave me the good memories? Now that man wasn't lost, but he knew what he had lost. You've done your best to disremember what all you've lost. You've spoiled the life that's yours by right of inheritance. You have to go around to the back door of a life that belongs to somebody else. You're neither here nor there. You're out in the cold, buddy. You don't have to live in the past. You can't even if you try. You don't have to talk old-fashioned, dress old-fashioned. You don't have to live the way your foreparents lived. But if you don't know about them, if you don't love them, if you don't respect them, you're not going anywhere. You don't have to think ridge to ridge the way they did. You can think ocean to ocean. You say, I'm not going to live in the past. And all the time, the past is living in you. If you're lost, I say it's because you're not living in your Father's house. It's the only house you've got, the only shelter you've got. It may be just a mountain cabin, but it's shelter, and it's yours. I left my father's house. Oh, I was moving. But I noticed I wasn't getting anywhere. I was living in somebody else's house. I kept stepping out somebody else's door, and the roads I traveled kept winding and twisting, had no beginning, had no ending. My own house, heired to me by my foreparents, was right there all the time. Yours is too, but I wasn't living in it. Well, I went home, and when I stepped out of my own front door, when I knew where I was starting from, I knew then where I was going. The only road I could go was the road that started from my own front door. In my Father's house, that's what the Bible says. And it speaks of the sins of the fathers visited on the children under the fourth generation. Says the sins of the fathers will set the children's teeth on edge. You're probably wondering why I wasn't talking about sin. Well, I am. But I say forget the sins of the fathers. What about the sins of the sons and daughters? We've got enough sins of our own to think about. We're able to set our own teeth on edge. Ours is the sin of forgetfulness. Forgetfulness of the fathers. Forgetfulness of a part of ourselves makes us less than we ought to be, less than we could be. Forgetfulness of the fathers makes us a people who hardly cast a shadow against the ground. You've heard it said you can't put new wine in old bottles. Well, I don't know. But don't be too sure you're not new wine, that you are new wine. Maybe we're all old wine in new bottles. The Brier was walking up and down the sidewalk in front of the hardware and sporting goods store, passing back and forth in front of the guns and fishing rods and catalytic heaters. The good crowd was gathering across the street in front of the Redemption store. He was pacing to the corner and back, stopping to lay a hand on a parking meter. Traffic was increasing in the street. Some of the people passing nodded or waved a hand, for they knew the Brier. He nodded and waved back. When the light stopped traffic in the street, he stood on the balls of his feet and talked across the tops of the cars to the crowd in front of the Redemption store. The light would turn and the traffic would move on. Cars and pickup trucks, motorcycles, RVs pulling boats. A boy parked his wide-tired, jacked-up car at the first parking meter in front of the Brier, got out and went into the hardware store. The Brier moved down and talked across the car's hood. I see these boys with their old cars jerked up on a pulley out under a tree somewhere. I see the cars looking like monster beasts that have these boys' heads bit off and half of their bodies already eaten up. I see them lying flat on their backs with their heads up under cars, nothing but their feet is sticking out, their hands mucking around in grease and gears. And I think, buddy, that's how America's got you. That's just the view you have of this country. You've had your head eat off, or else you're flat on your back, looking up into the guts and gears of America, up to your elbows in your moving parts, flat of your back, always looking up. And I think to myself, I'd like to open up your heads just like you raise the hood or go into a gearbox. I'd like to rewire your heads and gap your spark plugs and reset your timing. Because you can get off your back. You can have a new view. You can get behind the wheel of America. You can sit in the smooth, upholstered seats of power and listen to the music play. But first, you've got to come home and live in your Father's house and step out your own front door. There's a road back, buddy. Let me go back a little. Let me tell you how we got in this fix in the first place. Our people settled in these mountains and lived pretty much left to themselves. When we got back in touch, we started seeing we had to catch up with the others, and people came in telling us, you've got to run, you've got to catch up. Buddy, we've run so fast, we've run off and left ourselves. We've run off and left the best part of ourselves. And here's something peculiar. Running, we met people on the road coming back for where we were headed. Wild-eyed people running away from something. We said, what'll you have? And it turned out they were running away from what we were running after. They were on their way to sit a spell with us. We had something they wanted. When they got here, a lot of us weren't to home. We'd already run off and left ourselves. So they set to picking up all the things we'd already cast off. Our songs and stories, our whole way of life. We couldn't see the treasures in our own house, but they could, and they picked up what we'd abandoned. You say, preacher, you must be touched. That's foolishness. How can anybody run off and leave himself? I say, don't ask me. You're the one who's done it. You've kept the worst, you've thrown away the best. You've stayed the same where you ought to have changed. Changed where you ought to have stayed the same. Wouldn't you like to know what to throw away, what to keep, what to be ashamed of, what to be proud of? Wouldn't you like to know how to change and stay the same? You must be born again. Say you were going on a trip, knowing you would never be coming back, and all you'd ever have of that place you knew, that place where you'd always lived, was what you could take with you. You'd want to think what to take along, what would travel well, what you'd really need and wouldn't need. I'm telling you, every day you're leaving a place you won't be coming back to ever. What are you going to leave behind? What are you taking with you? Don't run off and leave the best part of yourself. And what is that best part? It's spirit. I tell you, I know in these places in these mountains, back off the big roads, up the coves and hollers, old home places with barns and apple orchards, cattle gaps haunted by spirits. Spirits of people who left there taking everything with them but their spirits. For spirits would not leave that place. And their spirits are there yet, like half-wild dogs or cats that will live on around the place after the people are gone. And I know other places in our towns and cities where the people have moved to without their spirits. Do you believe in signs? I do. I believe in signs. And when I see people living in dirt, living in filth and trash, I believe it's a sign. I believe it's a sign the spirits of those people are living somewhere else. For a spirit won't live in filth and nastiness. A spirit keeps its own place clean, like around a fox's den, when the little foxes come out and play in the evening